Hello and welcome back to the Great British History course and the War of 1812. Last time we left off with the Americans crushing the Indian Confederacy under Tecumseh at the Battle of the Thames on the northern frontier. During the latter stages of the war, however, the focus of the conflict moved south. For the beginning of the war, Britain had been forced to fight defensive campaigns as the majority of its military might was engaged in Europe in the Peninsular War as part of the larger Napoleonic Wars, which pitted the monarchies of Europe against Napoleonic France. Napoleon's defeat at the hands of the Sixth Coalition and his subsequent abdication on the 6th of April 1814 therefore freed up the British Army stationed in Europe under Wellington, enabling 15,000 British soldiers, many of whom were Peninsular veterans, to be transported to the USA for the first major British offensives of the war. The first force of Peninsular veterans moved against upstate New York under Lieutenant General Prevost. Prevost, hoping to secure his flanks, ordered the nearby British squadron under Downey to engage the American fleet stationed in Lake Champlain. However, the attack was hastily organised and, when Prevost failed to give the military support he had promised, the attack stalled, resulting in a great American victory at the Battle of Plattsburgh on September the 11th, 1814. After this defeat, Prevost, to the dismay of his subordinates, ordered the retreat of the army, fearing that his supply line would be cut off without naval superiority. Meanwhile, another British force under Major General Robert Ross and Admiral George Cockburn invaded the Chesapeake and successfully defeated an American force at the Battle of Bladensburg due to the flight of the American militia after coming under fire from Congreve's rockets. This resulted in there being no opposition to the British advance on the American capital, Washington, D.C. The British entered Washington on the 24th of August, 1814, and proceeded to burn down all the buildings of significance in the city, including the Capitol building, the Treasury, and most infamously, the White House. Revenge for the Americans destroying parts of York and Port Dover earlier in the war. On a more amusing note, Admiral Cockburn ordered the destruction of all the lettersees used to print newspapers, so that, and I quote, that the rascals could have no further means of abusing my name. The British occupation of the city, however, only lasted 26 hours, in part because a hurricane swept through the city. Whilst this would later be named the storm that saved Washington, as it put out the British fires, the resulting deluge and tornadoes created only further devastation within the city. Subsequently, in an attempt to inflict a decisive blow, Ross and Cochrane attacked Baltimore in September 1814 with 3,000 soldiers advancing on the city, whilst British warships bombarded Fort McHenry. Nonetheless, the Americans at the fort held out under Major General Armstead, in a feat that would inspire Francis Scott Key's The Star-Spangled Banner, which of course became the national anthem of the United States. The British, though, unable to force American surrender, and suffering numerous casualties, including Major General Ross, who was killed by a sharpshooter, withdrew. Since August, though, the British and American governments had been having peace talks in Belgium. Yet, the American victories at Baltimore and Plattsburgh weakened the British negotiation position, such that they had to abandon their demands for the creation of a Native American buffer state that Tecumseh had fought for at the Battle of the Thames. This, therefore, resulted in the Treaty of Ghent, simply concluding the war with territorial boundaries reverting to those that had existed at the outset of the conflict 2 years and 20,000 deaths earlier. However, there was one final major battle of the war, when a British assault on New Orleans under Pakenham and Cochrane was repulsed by future President Andrew Jackson. Although this engagement occurred over 2 weeks after the signing of the treaty, though news had failed to reach either commander. What, therefore, was the significance of the War of 1812? In the short term, it secured the survival of the still fledgling United States, yet it had many longer-term effects on the nation. It resulted in the disintegration of the pro-British Federalist Party, leaving only the Democratic Republicans as a political force. The war also resulted in the era of good feelings, as a result of the nationalistic patriotism Americans felt after the war, as they essentially believed they had won the conflict, despite having failed to achieve any of their goals at the war's outset, most notably the acquisition of Canadian territory. The war also served as an ignition for Canadian patriotism, due to the myth that it was Canadian militias that held back the American imperialists, even though, in reality, the defence of Canada was primarily the result of British regulars and American incompetence. As for Britain, however, the War of 1812 was essentially a backwater to the wider and far more important Napoleonic Wars, and, as such, had little impact on either British ethos or indeed British history. As one Canadian historian commented, "The War of 1812 is an episode in history that makes everybody happy, because everybody interprets it differently. The English are happiest of all, because they don't even know it happened." That concludes our look at the War of 1812. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. And thank you for watching the Great British History course. See you next time.